Well, joining us now to take a look at the governorship and House of Assembly elections is Armsfree Ajanaku, who is an analyst from the Center for Democracy and Development, actually the community lead there. Glad to have you join me. Armsfree. Yeah, good. Let me even start with what the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, just said there. The country is moving forward, and we cannot allow certain miscreants or what he called criminals to take us back. You want to look at that statement that he made?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the former president is right, on the money. He's spot on with that comment he made, because we're talking about the supremacy of the voices of the Nigerian people, and it is appalling that you would have criminals attack a process, deter voters from exercising their franchise. It's a slap, on the face of Nigeria as a collective, and we cannot continue the lamentation endlessly, which was why those of us at the Center for Democracy and Development, we try to provide a framework and insight into the possibilities that we have issues like this come up in the process. And that was why in our pre-election statement, we tried to, for one, because we did not want to wait until you have this kind of situation and then, everybody's lamenting, and, we wanted the security agencies to be proactive, and we flagged some high-risk states for electoral violence based on their history. When you go back to previous elections, when you go back to the pattern of electoral contestations in those states, you have these challenges, and those states require special attention. So it is disappointing in those instances where you have criminals, brigands, just invade and overrun a process that is about the reflection of the collective voice of the Nigerian people. Is unacceptable. But that being said, for us at the Center for Democracy and Development, we work on data, and we looked at the entire process. For this governorship and state assembly elections, we deployed a total of 1,200 observers, and we concentrated attention on some of the states we have always known have a flash, or their flashpoints for these kinds of incidents. Particularly, we spotlighted Lagos. We looked at Kano. We looked at even Bayelsa, which we were seen as, again, one of the flashpoints in the elections. We spotlighted Rivers as points of interest that we believe that we should pay a stronger attention to. It's not like the other states are not important, but we believe that based on the history and based on the data that we have collected over time, these states should have gotten extra attention, extra strategies, a lot of proactive measures should have been taken to protect the electorate in those states and make the electorate terrain a safe one for people who would come out there to vote. And so I mentioned earlier about our framing of the election. We talked about identity, that identity will be a driver of conflict in this election. And we have seen that playing out in Lagos. It played out in the presidential election, where identity was used as a basis by criminal elements to deter, certain, people of certain ethnic affiliation from voting in the process. And all of these is unacceptable. We talked about identity on religious lines, and we also talked about intergenerational identity as some of the core issues that will drive the nature of the contest in those places. So if we have provided all of these data and the respective institutions, we should act on those things have failed in their duty to, because if even one Nigerian is denied the right to vote, it is a collective slap on the whole of Nigeria, because number one, money has been expended in this process. InEC has committed resources to this process, and those resources must not go down the drain. So no matter if we say maybe the election went well, or things went well in majority of the polling unit, even if it's one citizen that is denied that fundamental right, that political right, that democratic right, we should all rise up to ensure that, that person gets justice and that person gets redress.
Well, but nothing is ever perfect. I think what we always aim for is a reasonable amount or percentage, voters 75, 80, 85, 90. But it's very pertinent what you said. Some places, like we listen to the speaker, Femi Gbajabiamila there. We listen to the former governor of Lagos State, Fashola there. And then, of course, that report talked about him, two of them, and the president-elect, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It was peaceful, smooth, But then, and they said INEC raised the bar in those places, but in some other places, it wasn't. The question is, do we not know these flashpoints over time? Because you're supposed to learn lessons from one particular process if you're going to another process. So do we not know about these flashpoints? And shouldn't we make provisions for these flashpoints particularly so that we won't have these things occurring over time, in repeat mode?
I want to assert with all sense of responsibility and all sense of confidence that we know this flashpoint. I would say it for free that the work we do as civil society is not like we're just embarking on jamboree. We spend sleepless nights mining data. We spend sleepless nights talking to people, in various, parts of the electoral terrain, talking to them about their concerns, talking to them about their fears. As a matter of fact, like CDD, the observers we deployed are not just working for election day, because election is not just an event. It's a process. It's a cycle. And so if you are not following every bit of the cycle, you will miss out on particular nuances that are required, for you to extrapolate and make the right judgment call in terms of how the process pans out. So for us, those flashpoints are known. And this is why we issue pre-election reports, and even before pre-election reports come, we issue periodic statements about certain aspects of the process. And the whole essence is to draw attention, because we know that no matter how big an institution is, it cannot be everywhere. It may not have all of the information. And so we try our best and do our bit as civil society as a contribution to the improvement of the process to provide, quality data to the relevant institutions. And so when we do our statements, when we make our statements, we make recommendations to INEC, we make recommendations to security. But you cannot also have a situation in which you are forcing a horse to the stream and also forcing the horse to drink. So we believe that the institutions need to up their game. And in fact, in our framing of this election, we initially talked about setting 5 eyes which would shape the way the elections will play out. One of them was the eye of identity. The other is the eye of insecurity. Next to it is the eye of information disorder, the role that social media is playing, in these elections, the role that false online narratives are playing in the delegitimization of the process. We also talked about the eye of intra and inter-party squabbles that would affect the process. And eventually, after our first brief before the presidential election, we added the eye of infrastructure. And for the governorship, we updated those framing thematic issues. And we now added the issues of preparedness of the institutions, particularly INEC. And we then went on to talk about the issue of voter participation, and all of this. So we are working around the clock, working assiduously to ensure that the process, improves. So when some institutions with a responsibility, in the chain of ensuring that the electoral process works well, drops the ball, it becomes really a disappointment. But we are not giving up. We continue to engage the process. But we know that, yes, no process is perfect. But you cannot see the kinds of sins we saw coming out of Lagos. And by the way, we also joined the, not just Nigerians and, the international community, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, and all the groups that, fight for a free press in condemning unequivocally that very, very dastardly and heinous attack on the Arise cameraman or the Arise crew in Lagos. It is unacceptable, and that was, just the only incident that targeted journalists. In Kano, we also recorded, an attack on a journalist. So all of these incidents of violence, we must be ready to confront them head-on as a people and as a society, because if we just say, okay, things went well in majority, and we let the people who are responsible for this very unacceptable development to just go like that, then you are further emboldening them. Because in the presidential election, we also saw these kinds of things. It shows that while INEC tried to learn and to improve the process, the security did not also follow the pattern that these guys, use in operating. People would just come, invade a whole community, and then disrupt the voting process. At the end of the day, some are even trying to move away with the beavers, some are burning materials. It is unacceptable, and no matter how well the process goes in other places, we must be able to push for better outcomes than what we saw from those scenes that you have just shown to your viewers.
All right, Armsfree, we'll get back and continue. You're still watching the special coverage of Nigeria State Governorship and Houses of Assembly elections. There is more when we return. Don't go away. Right, I still have me here, Armsfree Ajanaku, Communications Lead, CDD, that is Center for Democracy and Development. It's interesting, the clean foundation there. Before we get back to what we discussed earlier, there's a 75% of polling units covered. Security was upbeat, but Albino Foundation contradicts that, takes a swipe at police. I don't know what you make of those divergent views.
Yeah, so it very much depends on the methodology and the expanse of the deployment that the group has deployed. I would wait to see what methodology Clean Foundation used. Our own observation, observers on this governorship election actually reported a reduced presence of security across the board, and so we see that as maybe a reality that incentivized the activities of those criminal elements, saying that the security presence was also thin, and a lot of them took advantage of that in unleashing mayhem on voters. So in terms of security deployment, I think our data is clear that in this election compared to the presidential, there was a reduction in terms of the presence of security across the electoral
Could
terrain.
the reduction be due to the fact that we don't seem to have enough of the security personnel?
Yes, I think the agencies responsible should be able to throw a lot more light in terms of the strategy they had in mind, because we cannot be saying that INEC should learn lessons, and in this election it's clear that INEC learned its lessons from the presidential elections, implemented certain changes. Our data, for instance, shows that in 80% of the polling units, the reconfigured beavers were there and they were in order. Even in places during the presidential election that you had slower deployment of INEC, in this governorship, you had vast improvements in that process. So on our own part, we commend INEC for ensuring that the issue of logistics, which has presented a perennial headache for the electoral process, has actually been tweaked, and we have seen improvements. It's clear across the board. Nobody would say that INEC has not upped the ante in terms of its logistics deployment. But INEC can do its own part, and then the security, which is not within its purview, even though it has the interagency consultative committee on election security, but security is still within the purview of the security institutions, the police and all the other agencies responsible for security. If they also did not learn certain lessons from some of the incidents of violence we have seen, they would kind of muddy whatever improvement that INEC has done, which is why now you can see the narrative is shifting more to security now than the question about logistic deployment. In the presidential, much of the spotlight was on the logistics deployment because that is where the challenges came up. So maybe moving forward, we should be able to do all of this advocacy side by side. As we are advocating to INEC, we also intensify the advocacy to the security institutions to ensure that one person or one aspect, dropping the ball does not, come back to haunt, maybe an aspect that has people have put in a lot of work to ensure it improves.
All right, good. Let me take you back to the question of, you've kind of discussed it. You talked about the 6 I's, Let's talk about participation. Let's talk about identity. Break them down, particularly identity, what you mean, how it either affected negatively or positively this particular governorship and House of Assembly election. And then we could talk some more on INEC, which you have already talked about before I got there. So let's discuss that.
Yes. So with respect to identity, which was which is one of the first I that featured in our framing, CDD framing of the core issues that would shape the elections. We looked at identity in various aspects. The very first one we saw that would play a negative role of driving conflict in the electoral process is identity in terms of ethnicity, where you come from. And in our extrapolation of the issues in the process, we mentioned specifically that Nigerians embrace multiple identities. People who have, intermarried across lines, people who have lived in different parts of the country. So we live in a country of diversity within diversities, which ordinarily should be a source of strength. But we also made the point that for the typical Nigerian politician, identity is, a way in which they feel that they can project themselves politically in terms of ethnic identity. So during the presidential elections, for instance, we saw that very long debate about zoning. We saw the debate around Muslim tickets, which is religious identity. We saw several forms of identities being bandied across. And we warned at the time that these aspects of identities, when politicians use them to divide the electorate, it becomes a source of conflict. And when it becomes a source of conflict, you are now pitting one group of people against the other. And the politicians never listened. They kept on harping on where I come from, it's our turn, and this thing. So we called for a much more unifying narrative, a pan-Nigerian narrative, which should speak about the unity of Nigeria, the togetherness of Nigeria, and the manifest destiny of Nigeria.
Especially in the areas where we see as metropolitan.
Exactly. Where
like Lagos.
Exactly. So in Lagos particularly, this issue played out, but it's not only in Lagos. In some of the states in the northwest, for example, where banditry is also an issue, our research from the CDD has also shown that there are multiple nodes that drive the conflict in those areas. And one of those multiple nodes is also the node of identity in terms of the ethnic dichotomy between the Hausas and the Fulanis in a place like Zamfara, for instance, and it also impacted in terms of the way the campaigns for the governorship happened. So in that sense, identity was a divisive factor. It was a factor that did not remember that there are people in Lagos who have intermingled, who are brothers, who have lived together in communities. So identity came and started, politicians used it to divide people.
I mean, when some people talked about the kind of LP, is it kind of LP as being an Igbo, man?
Exactly. Those kinds,
instead of being...
Exactly. Those kinds of narratives.
That.
And when you see some of the voter suppression incidents we saw in Lagos, it was cases of some people saying, oh, this place belongs to us, and so if you are not voting our own preferred candidate, go back to where you have come from. Or
whereas the people you're talking about even helped develop the state.
Absolutely. It's a point that we made so strongly that yes, we believe in diversity. Nigerians under the constitution can live in any part of the country. They can do their business. They can. Yeah, we also know that we should all respect each other's sensibilities and cultures and things like that. But when it comes to an issue like voting, you cannot impose your agenda on the next person.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. And you also saw very, very disturbing situations. Like there was a Bale, a local chief who called the whole people in the community and said, I have orders from the top that you must vote a certain party, and if you don't vote that, you cannot live to here. You understand? Those kinds of things, they come from the fact that the politicians refuse to push a unifying message.
All right, let's talk more on
together.
That's dealt with that identity. Yeah. Participation. I mean, I had, I think, Victor Kenneth Eze here of the Speak Out, who was saying that this time around, the youths didn't particularly come out. And I said to Esther that what it takes for evil to thrive in the land is for good men to cease to talk or to cease to act. So let's talk about voter turnout. I mean, it looks like it's not been the way it was during the presidential elections. What could have led to that?
Yes, first of all, we have to make a clarification, which is to say that every discussion on the voter turnout or the extent to which people turned out to vote should be based on the data.
Good.
Because if you make anecdotal postulations around voter turnout, and then INEC eventually announces the results, and you see that you are wide of the mark in terms of what you postulated or projected for voter turnout, it becomes like you have put the cart before the horse.
So what some people are saying might be subjective.
Absolutely, it's subjective, because if you look at the presidential, during the early period of voting, there was the hue and cry that, oh, people have turned out in large numbers, INEC has not delivered the materials. But we came back later to see that the voter turnout was 27% at the presidential election. And the 27% was a drop from what we recorded in 2019, which hovered between 33 and 35%. So just using the eye of seeing people on the queues and all of that to talk about voter turnout for us is not driven by data.
Good.
And we want to stick with the data in terms of what we project. But for this governorship election, our initial projection
and House of Assembly.
House of Assembly, yes, House of Assembly in the 36 states. Our projection was that because of the fact that all politics is local, yes, and the localization of the contest would drive turnout. But seeing still on the anecdotal basis, we still want to wait and then see what, we know that there will be variations across the states. You talk about a place like Kano, for example, the variations will be there. But we also have a projection, which is that in states where the incumbent, because there are incumbents in 11 states that are running.
17 are going to be new governors.
Yes. So in states where incumbents have a robust challenge from the opposition, that tends to be an incentive to drive up the turnout figures. But as the results come in, we'll see definitely what the turnout figures will be.
Before I let you go, I cannot forget what one of the when I was one of the political gladiators or just a voter made a very poignant statement, I must say. He said, embrace each other Times are hard. Embrace each other and be calm. It's not war. After the votes, let's get together. What do you make of that statement?
Yeah, that statement is absolutely, absolutely profound. Profound in the sense that at the end of the day, after elections, life would go on. And we'll be talking about governance. We'll be talking about beyond the ballot. We'll be talking about social progress, how to improve the lives of the people as we speak. The various policies, and that ties to the eye of the institution, the various policies of some institutions have strangulated Nigerians. Businesses are collapsing, businesses are dying. You know, the cashless policy, yeah, the old Naira note is, beginning to return in trickles now. But Nigerian people need a new lease to push them economically and in every sphere. So after the election, after the votes, are
there's
counted,
life after the ballot.
There's life after the ballot, and I think there's also an important point around participation, which we didn't mention when we analyzed identity, is the positive aspect of identity, which comes in the form of intergenerational identity. Young people, the whole debate around young people participating in this process, which is something we have always advocated for, that historically marginalized groups, they should be a part of the process. They should come out. And in this election, we have seen the energy of the youth. But I think we also have a lot of work to do in terms of messaging to assure people that if the process does not work in your favor this time, in terms of the outcomes, maybe your candidate did not win, it's not enough to give up on the process, because eventually this is a process that will govern your life as a citizen. That's
true. Thank you so much. It's like you stay on the course. You can't, because you fail. A writer said, the writer's falls 7 times, but it gets back up 7 times. So you continue to move on until you get to where you're going to.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Armsfree, Ajanaku, Communication Lead, CDD.